Welcome to the FCI seminar series for today. This is our fourth in the series for this term, and today we're really happy to welcome two faculty who have been thinking really carefully about how creativity and imagination take part in these large foundational courses. So first we'll hear from Mary Lou Dorf. Mary Lou is a collegiate lecturer, now America, in the professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, or EECS, which is easier to say. And the course that she has been a driving force behind is EECS 183, which is Elementary Programming Concepts. So there are a number of ways on campus that folks get introduced to programming, and one of the things with this course has been thinking of ways to open those doors to as many students as possible, inviting in people who might not have thought of themselves as programmers. So we'll hear some about that. This is on the really big end of big courses, so about, is it 900 students per term?
I think it's a little over 1,000 at this point.
Okay, so, and growing.
And growing.
Yeah. And then we will hear from Mika, LaVaque-Manty, who is a Third Professor in Political Science, a philosopher by training, and Director of the LaVaque Honors Program. And the course that Mika will talk about is Poli-Sci 101, Introduction to Political Theory. And we'll hear about some of the ways that creativity and imagination play a role in that course. So, and as after we've had a chance to learn about what is happening in these courses, then we'll have some conversation to follow. So hope you'll be able to stay for that. So, okay.
Thank you. So this is about EECS 183, and the background of the course is there's about 550 students per semester back in the fall of 13, winter of 14. And the current is a little over 1,000 a semester. So it's grown over the last few years. Very, very typical course back in the fall of 13. The students mainly that took it, I would say 40%, 50% were taking it because it was a required course. Right? The other ones were taking it, several of the other ones were taking it because it was required for their prospective major that they had not declared as of yet. Right? Some were in there, but it was only about 20-30% were in there because they really liked the course and wanted more information about coding and programming and the possibility of maybe becoming a major. The projects were auto-graded, and what that means is the students use a website to submit their project to a computer. And the computer tests their code. Right? So it's not hand-graded. 550 students, if we sat down and hand-graded, they would get the results back the following semester. Okay. With no input whatsoever during this semester, so that's not a good idea. So the only way we could handle 550 was to auto-grade them. And what they get back from the computer is a series of tests, and you either passed it or failed it. If they failed it, the first one they failed, we call it full disclosure. This is what you got. This is what it should have been. And with that, there's enough information for them to determine, right, where the problem is coming from. Right? Staff, there are 4 lectures. Back in 13, 2 faculty members covered the 4 lectures. Plus, we had a number of staff. Right? There were about 2 graduate students, and the rest were undergrad that covered the discussion sections. So there were a number of student issues back then. Number one, they wanted more freedom on the projects. Since how it is graded by a computer, you had to be very exacting. So if they spelled a word wrong, it absolutely would fail. Of course, it would fail every last test all the way through, and that's an easy one to correct. But they wanted more freedom on projects. We laid out the design of the projects for them. So we pretty much told them, you will use these functions, and this is very specific what it will do. Right? They had to figure out how to make it do that. If we wouldn't have designed it, they would have written everything in a mainline code. So they would put everything in the main program. It's like writing an English paper with one paragraph. We want them to use several paragraphs through it. They wanted a more real life. We thought they were pertinent, but the students didn't. So they didn't see the connection between what we were asking them to do and what they could imagine how it would pertain to their future or to their everyday life. Right? They believed they were difficult. Yes, they had to work on them several days to get them correct. They couldn't sit down and whip them off in 2 hours. Okay, we were boring. And they found the course was full of busy work. So what we did was, I also had some issues. Final exam, when I looked at what is the student's percentage in the course thus far, and what percentage did they get on the final exam, the final exam helped between 4 and 5% of the students. 4 and 5% of the students. Everybody else, it lowered their grade. Right? So obviously the final exam was kind of questionable at best. Right? I also wanted more females in the class. The class was a third females. It had been about a third females for the last, 5 years or so. And it had never moved off of that 1/3. But I wanted it close to a half. I wanted more minorities, and I also wanted more first-gen students. First-generation students. The student experience, they sort of liked the course, but they didn't love the course. They were not highly passionate about the course. I'm passionate about coding and about this being an incredible career for them. Is it working? I think. So I came up with this idea, hey, replace this final exam that didn't have much use anyway with a final project. Give them the flexibility on the final project that they could choose between 3 to 4 to 5 different ones, something that they might find very interesting. Right? And these projects would be very pertinent to their life. How about a replacement for course guide? Course guide is okay, but it's not incredible. All right. How about you now? Thank you. So, like anybody, I would go around and ask, the people in the department as far as, what do you think of this idea? Well, they thought it was a great idea, but nobody could do it. Right. Absolutely nobody could do it. I think I heard "you're crazy" more times than not. I think you were one that told me that. I have been called "you're crazy" more times in my life than I can count. So what I did over the summer was I listened very carefully to all of the people that I valued their input from and ignored them. Okay. I said, I really think this can work, right? I really think this would be best for the student. So over the summer, I came up with some ideas for possible final projects. And of course, to make room for the final project, which takes about a month, I had to reduce the amount of material that got covered. So I went through the topics one by one, and I said, is this critical or is this fluff? Is this really needed to get them into the next course and survive the next course? Or is this is a really cool topic? Right? So I cut the topics that we would cover. Of course, that means the entire schedule had to be redone. I had to call LSA and have the exams moved. And I also had to redo all of the projects that we gave during the semester to make sure I did not include any material that was now cut from the course. All right, so 2016 we started, we were expecting 650 students, or maybe I should say only 650 students. Over 800 registered. We have no idea where they came from. Over 800 registered. So the final project, we started a little bit before school started. Some of the staff was very enthusiastic about this, and they spearheaded the projects. So they designed them, they spec'd them, and they wrote all of the hard code that would be above the level of the students. That they could use it, right? But there's no way on earth they had the ability to write portions of it, right? So we did a web-based game. Actually, we had 5 when we began. We had a web-based game, but we also had a web-based project. And we started with a better choice than course tools. So you need to load in all of the data. We did the scrapers that pulled all of the courses and put them into files for them. So they had to import all of the files. They had to come up with a better web design of them. They had to have search capabilities. They had to display all possibilities. They said, I only want courses on Monday and Wednesday no later than 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Come up with everything that fits that. And put my entire schedule together for me. Minor little issue, right? They did it, right? Another one was a computer game. They needed to do it in C++, but it also needed to have artificial intelligence with it. So if you were playing such as Connect 4, right? The user does 1, and it uses the AI to place the next checker. And the user chooses their move and uses AI to place the next one within. And there's a number of games that they could have done, but that was the one for that semester. AI, everybody know word clouds? Word clouds, all right? Create a word cloud. So we did it off of Piazza. Anybody here use Piazza for discussion? Okay, we use Piazza in the course. So pull the Piazza for the entire semester and do the word clouds off of the ones that have, you know, larger size words for those that hit the most frequent. And decide what is the word that describes the question asked. That was the artificial intelligence. It's really more natural language processing with AI in that. Arduino is a hardware kit, a little teeny little kit that does not have much memory on it that drives a display board. And I have an example of one coming up. So I can't ask them to do this much work. I mean, this is a month-long project. They're in teams of 4, so they have to know how to work with teams of 4 and do this massive project that when they read it, they say, there's no way on earth. You know, she's insane. We can't possibly manage this. Of course, that's what they said about all projects during the entire semester, so. But they needed a way to get a pat on the back, to have somebody other than me telling them they did a great job. So we decided that there had to be a showcase. We did it in Palmer, up in the Great Lakes room to begin with. We ran it from 9 to 5, and there were different sessions that the students were at. So think of science fair, and every hour another group of students come in to show off their projects. That's another example of the showroom. It is now in the Michigan lead because we outgrew Palmer. Next slide, please. This is the Arduino. So there's a little kit down here with a control, and it is displaying on the board. Okay? And we started with, I don't know, Space Invaders or something, old game things. They love it. They love it. And they can do anything they want with it. Any game, they control anything. And some do set up controls that are impressive. For the pats on the backs, it couldn't be from the faculty. It had to be from somebody totally outside. No invited companies. Right? JP Morgan Chase has been there from the very, very beginning, and they have been become a firm believer in this. So these are the companies that support the showcase over the years. Some are there only in the fall, others are there only in the winter, some others are there in the spring, that we started offering this course in the spring last year. So if you are interested and really want to see the showcase, it is coming up. Winter 18 is Thursday, April 19th. Michigan League, 9:30 to 12:30, 1:30 to 4:30. We do take a lunch break. That's something I learned after the first semester. You know, for the faculty, for the companies, we really do need a break in the middle for lunch and to sit down. Right. There's 4 sessions. This is split into 2 sessions. This is split into 2 sessions. There's about 60 teams per session, 4 students per team. Come take a look. There's music, there's balloons, there's muffins, there's cookies. It's one huge party. Okay? And it is a party because it's all due before finals week. So this is the time they can relax and enjoy and really get many people around to say, great job. Now they're bounded only by their imagination. It increases their confidence, something that a final exam never, ever could. They get pats on the back from strangers and from people in the companies that know what they are talking about like we don't. Right? They are real life because they know the impacts of everything. There's absolutely more to do. Right? Number of boxes were checked of what they wanted, but they still found lectures somewhat boring. And right, we did eliminate busy work. We asked them, okay, define busy work because we don't know. So they defined busy work for us, and we said, can we really do away with that or not? And we did away with most of what they told us. They still found the course a lot of work. And it satisfied most of the faculty's concern. But the other concern I had was student experience, right? Our evals at the end of the year were good, right? But they weren't fantastic. The students liked the course. They liked the course more than they did before. But they still didn't love the course. And I wanted them to love the course. So now what we did, we worked on that experience. What can we do better? So we went back and redid all the lecture slides. We put an interactive in the classroom. And we're running about 1,000 now, so each lecture is about 250. You can do interactive with 250 students. It takes a lot of work, it takes some experience, it takes some imagination on how to do it. But you can do interactive with 250 students in the class, right? We do it almost every lecture. They work in teams during lectures, so we give them a problem. Okay, working with your teammates on there. The first thing they need to do is ask the students on either side, what's your name? What's your unique name? So now they have their email. And now they have some other person in class. The last 2 regular projects are done in teams of 2, if they so choose. The last one is done in a team of 4, which is mandatory. Nobody can do this alone. Right? That is enforced. So now during lecture, they get to meet their fellow students, which they like. We also put in a meet the staff section. We now run a staff of about 32 to 35. It's a class on its own. Right? 32 TAs supporting the course. So now we have a meet the staff section of which they go in and meet them personally. They can ask them anything they want. We put in additional office hours. We also went to the chairman and said we really need more staff to support office hours. That was the downfall of the course, was the office hours. There were hours-long waits. Hours-long waits. So we put an additional thing in. We also gave them a t-shirt at every showcase. eCoach. How many know of eCoach? It is fantastic. Amazing. So we jumped in sort of at the beginning of it, and it has grown up since then. It is a wonderful way to keep your grade. That is the one thing we did, was we kept grades in eCoach, and it estimates all the way through their prospective grade for students. It can give encouragements to students, you know, time to start your project, right? Or we fed the information from the autograder to it, right? It's 3 days into the project and we noticed you have not submitted yet. It's time you started your project. Or halfway through, we noticed that you've submitted once or so, you have a ways to go. We encourage you to get back at it. Or, great job, we noticed that you got all points on the project. Super. So it can encourage the students, and you can set it up so that it just automatically does it. I used to do this by hand, and it would take me hours to do. Last year we went to iClicker questions. How many use iClickers? Students love them. I've asked, do you really like these? And they go, yes. Because it's like getting a mini quiz every day in lecture. So now when it comes to the real exam, they've already been through them many, many, many times. And I don't use it as attendance. I use it as they have to get 50% of the iClicker questions correct on any given day to get 1 point. 1 point. It maxes at 10, so there's more lectures than where they can get them at, so that removes the pressure. We run the class off of 1,000 points. This is 1 point. The students show up to lecture, they pay attention such that they can get the iClicker questions correct for 1 point. I would urge you to do it. We do interactive exercises almost every lecture. There's a few. In redoing all the lecture slides, I pulled many words out and put images in. If I could explain something with an image or with an animation, I did it. Right? But I pulled the words out. We put in a break halfway through. You get a 3-minute break. Stand up, walk around, go get a drink of water. Chat with the person across the room. We put in music at the beginning of lecture. It's always peppy. It's always energetic. It's always in the top 20. Built-in jokes. Everybody likes them. Online book. There were years I never used a book because it was $120 to buy. And when I asked how many read it out of a class of, I don't know, I think there were only 500 at that point, there were like 10 people that read it. But why should I support the book companies? So finally there was an online book, $25 a semester for the students. It is short and to the point. So they only have to read like 5-6 pages a night before a lecture. They manage 5 or 6 pages. Sometimes it's long, sometimes it's 10 pages. There's also interactive questions there. So you read a couple of paragraphs, you answer a couple of questions. You read a few more paragraphs, answer a couple of questions. I now know if the students have read it or not. We give them credits. They need to get 80% correct, right? By Friday, we check it every Friday of the week, right? And they get points. We max this at 40. They now read. They now do the interactive. And they don't complain. We also set up tutoring. We don't have too many tutoring sessions per week. This is done by the TAs. And the students can sign up for 1 hour of tutoring per week, right, done by the TAs. So what we did was we basically put the students in charge of their own grade. Changed their entire attitude. And it was difficult for us to relinquish that power. And it is power. It is power. And I decided really it was part ego too. No, I'm the one in charge. I'm the one that holds your grades. I'm the one that decides. Well, no. Right? I basically said, okay, you're in charge of your own grades. right? You all start at 0 and you build up. This is how you build up. Students are in charge of their own grades, and it is laid out such they can get 100% on everything except for exams. And we give 2 midterm exams during the semester. But the readings, they have an infinite number of submits to it. After the 3rd one, they can even look at the answer and come up with the answer and put it in. Okay? The projects, they get 2 weeks to do it. They get 2 submits a day, but that is enough through the entire 2 weeks with the feedback, with the office hours. They can get 100% on it. They can get 100% on every last item except for exams. And we laid this out for them. We use eCoach that says, we noticed you missed your reading for last week. You're leaving points on the table. If you do this during the entire semester, you're lowering your grade by X%. So instead of giving an A, you now will get an A- to a B+. Do you really want to do this? Right? And they go, oh, I guess I better do the readings. Right? But it's all done through eCoach. I would strongly urge you to use eCoach if you don't. Right? Exams. We publish past exams. We also have them on there. We also run an exam review. We also ask the iClicker questions during every last lecture. And those iClicker questions are past exam questions. They're not simple. Some are simple, but they're not obvious on all of them. They're challenging. Okay? We also put up a website, very, very easy to use. And we did it ourselves. I would urge you to go to it. It's under EECS 183, easy for the students to remember, .org, O-R-G. We pay for it. We cannot get the University of Michigan yet to give us the domain EECS 183 such that we can run it off of UMich. Okay? So it's EECS183.org, O-R-G. I highly suggest you take a look at it. It is extremely simple. Everything is there for the students. It is only a click away. We score exams within 48 hours. It used to be 24. We can't do 1,000 students within 24 hours anymore, right? Something about when it gets 3 or 4 in the morning, we start making mistakes. So we do it over 2 days rather than 1 day. Now when we look at reviews, we ask the students, what is your overall impression? They fill this in after the last day of lecture, right? And I don't know if it's before or after the showcase. So, overall, what's your impression? 2% hate the course. 2%. Okay? Most of them are in this range. Workload gets a lot of work. But guess what? They no longer complain. They no longer complain. Because now it's their choice. They're in charge of their grade. We are no longer driving it. Right? So it's their choice if they want to get a perfect score on that project or not, or if they want to take a day or 2 off and go do whatever. Right? A lot of work. They don't complain about it, which is incredible. Challenge, it's a challenging course. But right, it's doable. And they view it as well worth it. The enjoyed 183, most of them fall within this range. Right? Neutral? Okay. When you're down in this range, right, those are the ones that did not enjoy it. They now love the course.
Now you're pointing
Now I'm pointing at you. Recommend this course to others. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I honestly believe this is why the course keeps growing at a very large rate.
Yep.
They love it. Read the lectures. Hey, we even improved in lectures. We're no longer as boring as we used to be. So in conclusion, we basically gave the students exactly what they asked for. We also gave us what we wanted. Knowledge, their exam grades are higher than they used to be. Okay? The average grade in the class used to be in the B's. Average grade in the class is now A's. And we did not compromise on difficulty. The students used to say that projects are too hard. They did not get easier. If anything, they got more complex and more involved. That final project is unbelievably harder than anything we ever asked of them before. Okay? Oh. Confidence. Yes, they have confidence now. The percentage of females, minorities, and those first generation students, they are now going on to the next course in even higher percentages. And in that following course, 280, we are approaching 50%. We're close to 50% now, but the females, the percentage of females and males that go on are really 50-50 at this point. The numbers are not there yet with the females, but the percentages going on are there. So now we just need to increase the numbers. Right? We even won a national award for the percentage of females that declare computer science as a major. We are significantly above the national average. Of course, the national average is despicable. Right? It's like 25%. Right? Ours was 30% of all majors. 30% of all of the majors are female. Right? We did this also with departmental support. Without them giving us the additional staff and the hours of the staff, instead of maxing at 10, I think they allowed us to go to 12 hours per. Well, when you have 32 staff, it makes an immense difference on office hours. So in conclusion, t-shirts given to everybody at the showcase. My book is well worth every hour spent. And it doesn't come free. It does come with time commitment. So thank you.
All right. Mary Lou is always hard act to follow, but when we talked about this session in planning it with Meg, we both realized that these courses, if you think about either EECS 183 or Poli-Sci 101, creativity and imagination don't come to mind. Lots of people think that large gateway courses are about information provision. And anybody who thinks that in 2018 should get into travel agency business because it's a losing proposition at this point. So this is a picture this semester from Poli-Sci 101. It's a medium-sized course by my standards, especially compared to EECS 183. In the winter, it's 240 students. In the fall, it's about 300 students. This is, many of you may recognize, it's Angel Odd A horrible room. People think classroom, auditoria are great. Yeah, maybe for concerts, not for teaching, not for multilateral, multi-directional teaching and learning. They are horrible, yet I'm able to do this. So every other class, we do group projects. In this particular case, the students, all about 200 show up, are divided into 3 large groups. And they need to figure out how to arrange themselves. Each group appoints a scribe who comes to me, and I share a editable Google Doc with them, which I'm projecting. Because I discovered the hard way, if you put 300 people on a single Google Doc, you break Google. And if you turn your back, somebody's going to write rush semis or whatever. So we have 3 scribes working on a collective document that is going to be generate material for the students to learn when they review the materials. So that's just an example of using a back or let's say vestigial relic architecture to do something pretty interesting. Poli-Sci 101, it's a course that faces lots of challenges. Political science has 4 intro courses. 2 are required for the major. All of them carry social science distribution credit. And Poli-Sci 101, people think, cool, we're going to talk about Trump, or we're going to talk about how horrible Trump is, or whatever. It's Introduction to Political Theory, and they get Plato and Hobbes, and they'll go, WTF. So it's one of the 4 courses. Lots of students take it simply because they think it's the first political science course. It is, as I said, one of the 2 required gateway courses into the political science major, which is divided into these subfields. It's a little more complicated than this, but that means I'm showing this because it's important to think about what is the course for? What does it do? I have some colleagues who still think that the goal of our entry gateway courses is to provide the civics learning that our high schools failed to do. That might be necessary in some cases, but that's not going to be helpful. We're back into this idea that information provision is a losing proposition at this point. So it has to, on the one hand, prepare students for specifically political theory courses in our curriculum, but it also has to prepare them for other political science courses. Sometimes students take it and realize, okay, I'm done with political theory. Now I know I will never take any more of that. And that's useful information. It's true for all the others. Interestingly, this is a side point. I don't have statistics on my slides, but Political Science 101 is the one course that has grown over the last several years. All the other intro courses, despite their greater relevance, Poli-Sci 111, American Politics, is actually losing students. And so I think it's partly a virtue of how I and my colleague Lisa teach it. We teach it very differently, and that's one of the issues that's interesting for the FCI project, is that I'm not super happy that we're teaching it differently, but we are, but for some reason we are attracting lots of students. It's the largest conduit to our major. So unlike lots of social sciences and humanities class majors, we have not lost a lot of majors. We lost some to EECS and international studies. We've picked it up again, and our course is the largest gateway to that. So to serve what it needs to serve, there are a couple of things that it has to provide. I already ruled out information. It doesn't have to provide information. And once you realize that, no, I don't care if you don't remember who Hobbes is or who Plato is, I mean, maybe that's a little sad, but you know, it's not, the information is not relevant. It needs to provide concepts. The political science as a discipline is a discipline that has a bunch of concepts. We haven't fully agreed on as a department on what all those concepts are, but one example is versions of the collective action problem. All political science courses in some ways are premised on this idea that free riding seems rational and thinking about those things. So I had to get them thinking about, like, what does this mean? There are obviously other ones. Liberalism means something different from the way we use the word liberal in everyday use, getting them to understand that. Getting beyond unidimensional thinking about politics. It's not just left and right. So I use lots of two-dimensional things like this or other things to getting them thinking about, like, oh, you can be a conservative and liberal if you think about the concepts in different ways. So it's just concepts. I don't care if they remember these, but if they go to more advanced political science courses and have never encountered the collective action problem or issues of governance or what liberalism or democracy is, that's a problem. They also need to provide exposure, and this is specifically for political theory, to the kinds of canonical texts that political theorists read. I don't actually make them read this 16th century English sermon in black letter, but we do go through it in class, and I get students to read it aloud. They have fun time trying to do that. But so they need some exposure to what it means to deal with the data of this particular subdiscipline, which in political theory is texts of various kinds. So once you realize that, then you realize they don't all have to read Plato, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Marx. They need to read some of those so that they know that, oh, this is what it means to confront a conceptually difficult text. Do they need to know all of them? No. We don't even ask that of our graduate students. And then finally, they need skills of various kinds. And I'll spend some time talking about the skills because I think the skills are particularly important. My example here, in a not entirely coincidental coincidence, is an example of a board game. And I'll talk about the kinds of things that students can do in my class. But the skills are actually, first, analytic writing. So the data and the object material of political theory is analytic writing of various kinds, and the students need to work it. So in computer science, coding in a broad sense is the skill. In political theory, it's analytic writing. Also academic rhetoric, and I don't mean rhetoric in any kind of pejorative sense. Anybody who studies rhetoric and composition knows that rhetoric, thinking about like who my audience is, how do I talk to this particular audience, is really important. And connected to that is what we call in learning theory metacognition, reflecting on my own learning and what it is that I'm trying to do with any given thing I'm trying to do. So that's relevant, and this game will become relevant in a moment. And then finally, the concept of remediation, which sounds horrible. It sounds like, okay, you failed and you need to take Poli-Sci 101. No, the way I use remediation is from study of rhetoric, which is that you take an idea, concept, text, create it in one medium, and you remediate it. So if you take an essay and turn it into a poem, you remediate it. And that's the way I use the concept of remediation. And this board game is remediation of Thomas Hobbes' description of the state of nature. It's a final project in the course. It's an optional project. This is actually from 2009. I'll talk about the sort of structure of the assignments in a bit, but a bunch of students came to me and said, in the optional projects that you listed on the syllabus, you don't say anywhere a game is an option, but could we do one? I said, why the heck not? And so this is a game that's called The State of Nature, and the game that's solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And what the students did is that they looked at Thomas Hobbes' description of what humans are like in the so-called state of nature, what the conditions are, and then translated them into game logics. So for example, Hobbes thinks that in the state of nature we are likely to want to free ride. So if you land on the same square as with another player, you get to fight them or you get to cheat them. And so then there are all these learning things that once you learn the strategy of this game, you realize that actually, even though I have this rational initial interest to free ride and cheat, it's actually in my interest to collaborate, which is Hobbes' theory. Whether Hobbes is right, psychologists disagree, but that's the point. They took his theory, his logic, and translated it into the game logic. I do this remediation in lots of other ways. So students encountered Plato and Hobbes when they thought it was going to be Obama and Trump and Afghanistan and Putin, and they are frustrated. Another way I've done the remediation is that they get to write a blog. I started using blogging in this class about 10 years ago. At this point, you all may have discovered that there's a blog fatigue, so I don't actually use blogs anymore. But I used a world accessible public blog, which I explicitly said your parents and your future employers can read this. And the challenge for them was to take something we read and then connect it to some contemporary issue and blog about it. One of my favorite blog posts a couple of years ago was we read Immanuel Kant's What is Enlightenment, where Kant argues for the right to be autonomous, to make your own mistakes, and a student wrote a defense of really high alcohol ABV soft drinks for teenagers, because it's a good thing for teenagers to learn to be autonomous. Now, I didn't actually agree with the analysis, but the student was very intrigued and was able to connect the most difficult German philosopher to teenage drinking, which was pretty awesome. And everybody could read that blog post. So that's another example of remediation. So what do I do in general? This is at a higher level of abstraction than what Mary Lou talked about, so I'm happy to describe some of the details. I mentioned a few. But so the goal in this class is to offer multiple paths. When there's no longer specific content that I care about, but the ability to make an argument, remediate, think of yourself as a learner, think about these concepts that we've encountered in lots of different ways. You can take advantage of students' different skills, inclinations, desires, and tell them, you can do this, you can do a group project. Or a couple of years ago, I started introducing these sort of mini exams. I had done away with exams because I found exams entirely useless. Students said, could we have some exams? I'm like, you're crazy, but why not? So we have mini exams, and I'm calling them, because this class is taught in a sort of gameful way. I'm using using a concept from video games, boss battle. And the idea of a boss battle in a video game is at the end of every level, you have something difficult in which you get to use all the skills and tools and equipment you've had to go through in that particular level. So the whole idea is that now you've mastered, or at least been exposed to this material, you've gotten these kinds of skills, now let's use it. So multiple paths. They can write conventional essays, they can do group projects, they can do these boss battles. What has replaced blogging this semester is this brand new tool I'm working with Carla on, which is basically, it's called Yellow Dig. You may have heard about it. It's basically academic social media. And it's a way for students to share contemporary issues in a very social media-like environment with an interface. It's restricted to just this class, so they can do it safely. It doesn't interface with their personal private social media, so it's safe in all kinds of ways. And it allows them to engage in all kinds of ways. And what's kind of cool about this tool is that it interfaces with Canvas pretty well, and it has scoring, auto-graded scoring built in. As Mary Lou talked about, her extremely large class, my class is big enough that it would be impossible for me to grade everything, even with my GSIs. I have one GSI for every 60 students. Many of the things that we do are either low stakes, so the grading is relatively easy, or auto-graded in the way that this Yellow Dig is, or I have reading quizzes. For every lecture, they have to do some reading, and those are auto-graded on Canvas. They also involve always an open-ended question, and my instructions are that if you BS on the open-ended, I'm gonna zero your points on the auto-graded one. And it's actually, you would not believe it, but it's very easy to eyeball even 300 short answers in a quick way to get a sense like, are these students getting it? What should I address in my lecture? So it's sort of auto-graded plus me eyeballing their answers. So multiple paths, students can do lots of different things. The engagement is hopefully meaningful, so they find the material bewildering and difficult. I tell them, how does this relate to your life? Don't ask me, you figure it out and write about it. Connect it to contemporary issues, connect it to what's going on in the news, think about various kinds of issues. And then, in the same way as EX183, I want to encourage safe failures. This is new for especially first semester freshmen. I want students to take risks. And so the exploration, they begin with 0 points, they level up. My new slogan is that anything you do, you learn and earn something. You might not earn as much as you want. You think, oh, I wrote good papers in high school, and then you write a theory paper and it kind of sucks. And you're maybe disappointed, but you still got some points. And more also, from my perspective and from the instructor perspective, you learn something. You learn both from doing that, and then you learn from the mistakes. So it's important, sort of this idea of building up is really important. And this idea of exploration and multiple paths has helped me generate fantastically cool things. So the board game was great. Not all group projects are great. My standard recommendation to the students is that don't create a group with your frat bros. It's not going to go well. Many don't believe me, and it won't go well. So I'm not going to lie and say that everything is fantastic. But a couple years ago, for example, I had two students, one a fantastically good student, and another great student, but who totally hated all humanities and social sciences. They were both music majors, and after reading Machiavelli, they decided, we're going to do Machiavelli's Prince as an EP. And they wrote the music, and they recorded it, and it's really professional quality stuff. It's really fantastic. Students love making videos. They particularly like Machiavelli because somehow cheating and being sneaky and all that is always really popular. But so they can make videos, and the whole point is, that's another example of remediation. But what's really cool about remediation, even if you're not particularly interested in getting people thinking about communication, it's that for you to remediate something successful, you have to get it. And you have to get it more than you would get it for studying for an exam. Because that, it might be enough for you to just, have the crank to handle mentality or just memorization. But for you to understand what is Machiavelli or Thomas Hobbes all about, so that I can do a video called A Day in the Life of a Prince, where the prince is a frat president on the University of Michigan campus, you really have to understand it. So those are the kinds of things that I've done in the class. I mentioned that I started with blogs as an option. I moved away from those. There's no single one tool that's ideal, so that's why I wanted to work at this slightly higher level of abstraction. Obviously also content matters, but one of the reasons I'm so excited to be presenting with Mary Lou is that you think EECS and political science, especially the humanities and the political science, have nothing to do with one another. But in fact, both of these courses are about creativity and imagination and fostering students doing that. And so that's why it's super fun to be here. And now our goal is to basically help you think about how these things might apply to your courses and obviously answer all the questions and all that. So that's it.
Time for questions.
I have a question before I leave, because I have to leave. How much work do either of you do in, or what kind of work? I know it's a lot of work. What kind of work do you do in terms of group formation and managing the dynamics? I mean, so often that students, so often they come in with varying degrees of skills working with each other.
So from my perspective, the group projects, the projects are optional. So that's one first thing. Students say, we hate group work, and I tell them, yeah, welcome to the real world. Everything is group work, you better get used to it. But I still don't force it on them. In-class group work varies quite a bit, so sometimes with those large groups, I can clearly see that some students are more engaged than others, and I just feel like it's their loss if they don't want to engage. But these group projects specifically, what's really helpful for me is that, hey, one of the concepts I teach is the collective action problem. So on their group project pitch, it has to include a statement of how will we do a division of labor, how will we manage the potential risks, and then at the end they also all evaluate one another. And usually students are very charitable toward their peers. If somebody really was either a total control freak or a total free rider, that will show up. Otherwise, I'm agnostic on how the groups form. We let them form across sections, which makes it the management a little complicated. We do it with Google Sheets, and we decide which GSI is going to grade whichever group. It's completely manageable even with 300 students, but it does take some extra work. But I have decided not to manage it beyond that. There are lots of good reasons to micromanage it much more. If it were mandatory, I would do it very carefully. I think it's a materials science or maybe Chemie course on North Campus that uses group projects where they think very carefully about who's in groups. Because of course we might have really problematic dynamics, not just that the frat bros are all together, but the quiet students, the international students or students who feel more self-conscious about their language, feel left out. So if I required it, I'd think carefully about it, and I would use surveys and things like that to create basically certain kinds of matches.
During the semester, we do 4 projects. The last 2 projects can be done with one other person. Those we have no control over, and we don't want to. So if they want to do that with another person, that's 100% their choice. The final project is a team of 4, right? We allow them to create their own teams of 4, but we do have a lecture on teams. How should you select your teammates? Your best friend might be a good idea, but maybe not. choose carefully because you're going to be spending a lot of time together over the next month. So they choose their own teams, but there is a lecture, there's a mandatory paper that they must read on teams and all of the downfalls and pitfalls with team management. There is multiple choice questions that they need to fill in, answer related to that paper to make sure they read that paper. And we want that paper read before they come to the lecture. The final project runs 4 weeks. 2 weeks into it, we have one deadline due that they need to do a submit that is graded. At that point, we also asked them a survey of about 20 questions, and this survey was put together, I think his name is Feldman, same person who wrote the paper. All right, so we have them fill in these 20 questions, and it's really rating your team members on the questions. So we turn their answers into numerics and do an analytic off of it. With that, we can tell the teams that have issues. So we don't ask the questions, rank your team members 1 to 5. That is not one of the questions. It's done by more specific tech questions. Do they show up at all the meetings? How often do they contribute at meetings? Have they been responsive to their assignments that they have done? That type of thing. So we have them do this. We run analytics off of it. We know the teams that are working. We also have an indicator of the teams that are not working. All the teams that are not working, we call in and the faculty members talk to the team members. And at that point, we have broken teams apart. We have split teams into 2 people and 2 people. We have reformed teams, etc. Or we have put the fear of God into them on, this is going to come back and haunt you, right? We have no qualms at all in adjusting grades. So if one came in and this team member did absolutely nothing, right? We have no qualms at all about giving them a 0 or a 10% of what the other team members got on that first portion of the project. And we explain to them very clearly what effect that is going to have on their final grade. We also do the same thing on the final submit to it. Right? They fill in the same survey. And it's amazing how attitudes change between that middle survey and that final survey. Right? They're kind of okay with each other on that first one. Boy, I think they really tell us the truth on the final one. And we do the same thing on the final one. If the teams are not working, we call them in, we talk to them, and we adjust grades.
And I'm interested in sort of the, you're both teaching often first semester freshmen, and the little experience I have working with ONSP and how they've sort of adopted and changed some orientation in how they do some training with intergroup relations now in ONSP, and I was wondering how even sort of the readiness for some of these creative and collaborative efforts can be brought outside of the class structure, outside of the unit structure, to the university structure, which could involve ONSP in a certain way. I know they're doing some intergroup relations stuff. Because getting the ground running with groups, they're reading an article, or if there's trouble, there are reactionary steps.
We also tell them that there's any issues, please tell us up front. I view the faculty members that I taught with very good mediators, and we all have learned to listen over the years. And some do come to us very early on, before they end up with serious problems. And we put in that halfway through the final project to kind of get people back on track. Most of the teams get back on track. Most of them start talking to each other. We also keep asking those teams, what's going on, let us know. It's not perfect. It's better than the way we first started, without the paper, without the discussion, without the lecture, without the questionnaire, without the support, it's much better now.
a question for each of you. Mika, you must have some kind of rubric to evaluate the variety of work that you get on those projects.
Yes, I'm a firm believer in rubrics that I share in advance with the students. I use both. Mary Lou gave a shout out to eCoach, which is great. I'm on the development team for GradeCraft, so I've been using GradeCraft for many years, and I use both GradeCraft and Canvas rubrics, and these are shared with students. And the reason I switched to using rubrics, I used to think like lots of people, like, oh, writing in particular is far too subjective. You can't grade with rubrics. But in fact, if you think carefully about what it is that you're trying to do, if you construct your rubric correctly, teaching to the test is exactly, writing on spec to the rubric is exactly doing them, getting them to do what you want them to do. And so I've done two things. One, in one class I have overall learning goals of the course, and every rubric is basically the overall learning goals of the course. So it's easy for students to relate to that. So comparability makes sense across very different kinds of assignments. The difficulty is that, well, different assignments require slightly different kinds of rubrics. So both the GSIs and the students can find that a little confusing if you have lots of different rubrics. But so adjusting that. But one class, I switched to the single rubric for the class after I wrote 38 rubrics for one class. I went crazy. So I'm now somewhere in between. So all of this is shared in advance so that students know what the expectations are. Especially for these long-term projects, they know them at the beginning of the semester. The one benefit of doing this several times, I always tinker with the class a little bit, but now I know at the beginning of the semester, every single assignment is ready. Students they can look at the end of semester assignments now, they can look at the rubric, they can look at the paper prompts, and I think that that's really helpful. When you do what we both do, which is make the grade depend on the student, give the students a lot of choice and agency. They need to have informed agency as much as possible.
You don't hide anything.
Right, that's the goal.
I would agree with him. We hide nothing. All the rubrics are there, all of the grading scales are there, everything we look at is out. And we publish it the first time we publish the specifications for it. So they know.
I have one question for you too, which is, you mentioned that you asked them what they meant by busy work.
Yeah.
What do they mean by busy work?
Before I used the online book, I used other books, and there was, they read the chapter. Well, the chapter was 50, 60 pages long. We also use another online tool known as Code Lab. So think of math class, okay, arithmetic, geometry, whatever. To learn how to do math, you do these 50 problems. And after you do the 50 problems, you sort of get the hang of the approach of it. Well, that is Code Lab. It does the syntax of C++. So when it comes to projects, they're no longer fighting the syntax of it. We used to have them run 500 problems during the semester, and they were somewhat repetitive. Well, we've cut it back to about 300 for the entire semester. And there were some other things during it. I don't remember right off. I could make a list for you if you wanted me to.
Because that comes up.
I just asked.
Yeah, the idea of busy work often comes up, and it's always interesting to see what do students consider busy
I
work.
asked them,
No, it's a great.
right? Okay, we're going to take 10 minutes out of lecture today, and you've got to tell me what you consider busy work. Tell me such that I can fix this for you. If you don't want to tell me, it's not getting fixed.
The other thing is just also framing. So one thing I tell them that, look, if you're a musician, you think playing scales is boring, but you have to play some scales. Just, like there are some things that is just good for you. If you're an athlete, you do some push-ups, or you do some boring things that are not your main thing, but that's necessary. So part of it is just framing that there has to be some busy work.
First, I want to thank you guys. These were both really awesome presentations, and I love what you guys have done. I love how you guys are really respecting the students' minds. I think we often underestimate what kids are capable of. So you think about games, and you look at like Pokemon. These kids memorize, like middle schoolers, these huge, thick indexes and like are looking at really complex ways that all these characters interact. And then they go to school and they're told, oh, well, now we're going to do this really basic thing. So it's really cool that you're like really raising that level. And I really like the way you've got these complex systems and they're very complete and they're working together to allow something to happen where if you put in any of those pieces, it would probably all fall apart without the whole thing. So I recognize that this is a lot of work to develop, and I'm curious as far as maintenance goes, because you're clearly changing things up as you go. It's not just like, well, we did it. We're done now, we're never gonna look at this again. Like, what do you think that maintenance process is gonna look like and be like for these classes?
Lecture slides, I change my lecture slides every 3 to 4 years, all the times I've been teaching. So redoing the lecture slides is just kind of, oh, I guess it's time to redo them. Right? That, and students recognize this. If you're using slides from 10, 15, 20 years ago, they know it. Right? It's pretty obvious. And they know what your commitment is to the course. So I always felt that refreshing slides and putting the jokes of the day in, you know, and I don't know, political comments. I don't do theirs very often, especially with Trump. Oh, that was a political comment, wasn't it? But they know how committed you are to the course. So I always felt that I had to be committed to the course. I expect the students to be committed to the course, right? So I also had to commit. The only thing that we change currently is we redo those final projects every now and then. And we are trying to build up about 10 of them. That is a major undertaking, but more than we have right now, such that we can rotate them through, such that there's always a fresh one that they can choose from. But the slides are set, the book is set, the code lab is set, everything is pretty much set, that another person could walk into this course. Hopefully they team taught it with me before they do that, otherwise they're going to be, oh my God. But pretty much everything is set right now. So as far as that, I would say readdress lecture slides every 3 years, try and put one new final project in. And projects through the semester, we also try to swap those out periodically also. Otherwise, cheating gets a little high.
Right, so that's a really great question, and my course, interestingly, is different. So it's just me. I teach, as I mentioned, I teach Policy 101. I share or I alternate with one of my colleagues, and she teaches pretty differently. So in some ways, even though I have GSIs, they can change from term to term. And so in some ways, mine is more dependent on what I've done. So it's not that I'm sort of thinking, oh, how cool I am, but it wouldn't work the way it does without me. And that would be fine. But there are a couple of interesting things about your question. So one thing, the flip side is that sometimes, especially when I talk to like the new faculty orientation about some of this stuff, new faculty who are beginning junior faculty here, they're like, oh my God, that sounds cool, but can I do it piecemeal? And so I have tried to think about ways of doing piecemeal, and there are some modules that you can pull out from these approaches. It's helpful to think about in those terms too, especially if you don't have the time to invest. So I agree with you that these are in some ways full packages, but they're still in some ways modular. And then I agree also with Mary Lou that it's important to change to stay current. What's nice though is that the things that instructors often worry a lot about, like exam question banks and doing new exams or avoiding cheating, because so many of my things are low stakes, the interest in students cheating is a lot lower. Is there some cheating? Sure, but it'll come out in the wash. And I spent some time thinking about collaboration. So on the reading quizzes, which are Canvas quizzes, and I tell them at the beginning of the semester, like, you might come to realize, like, oh my God, I could do this with somebody else, or I could pay my buddy to do it for me. I know this. So, and I don't care. I encourage you to collaborate. But if Mary Sue gives me the answers the entire semester, at some point Mary Sue and I are no longer friends because she will resent me because I'm the free riding jerk. So I tried to turn some of the things that that could be opportunities for cheating to actually turning them into collaboration, and then again having students think about what does it mean to collaborate. So, but it's tricky, right? Thinking about like what is the package, what does it require, what would fall apart if you did X, Y, and Z. But interestingly, as I said, I dropped blogs and I'm using this new tool. And there are some not exactly growing pains, but we're learning from it. But it's working pretty well, and it's doing the same thing. Think about concepts, make it relevant.
I also put time, and the slides I went through, there were time frames on there. And this grew over about a 4 or 5 year time frame, right? And that first major jump was with that final project. The only thing I did with slides at that point was cut out the material that I had cut. I didn't revamp them all, right? And the schedule, it was just pull out things that I was no longer covering and compress. So some of those were pretty minimalistic. They had to be done, but some were minimalistic. The main thing was the final project. And nowhere along the way did I say everything went smoothly, right? So yeah. There were mistakes, there were problems, there were issues, right? The morning of that final project, my entire staff came to me and said, please tell me this is going to work. Please tell us that this is going to be great and it's just not going to be one incredible disaster, right? My answer? Ask me at 5 o'clock and I'll know. We did not know. But I've done that so many times in my life, right? Believe your gut. Believe what your gut is telling you. You're not going to be wrong, right? It's going to take work. It's going to take commitment. It's going to take every last person I asked that told me, no, it can't be done. Right? So don't listen to everybody. Believe yourself. Have confidence in yourself. You know.
One last thing on this point, because I was just thinking of the sort of modularity of these different elements. So a couple of years ago, when it was LSA's sport and the university theme semester, I changed 80% of the content of Poli-Sci 101, and it worked. Everything else was the same. Sports, I love talking about it, so it was easy for me to change all the contents, all the reading, and then some of the reading quiz questions and things like that, but it worked. So I was able to pull a module out and put another one in, and the rest of it worked just fine.
So I like the idea of, you mentioned that in the showcases, outside company sponsored for students. It's really important for the students to update what they have learned in the classroom and see the relationship with the real world experience so that they're getting multiple skills prepared for the employment. I wonder what's the tricks you use to invite all those companies to sponsor and how they are involved with the course teaching process, not only for the final showtime. And I wonder whether we can do that for the Poli-Science after.
We're useless. Nobody's going to want to.
So that's fine.
And at the beginning, I mean, companies would say it's an intro course, we're not interested. We want to come see them when they're seniors, graduating seniors. So then we know what it is and we can hire them. Except JP Morgan Chase, they had the vision that, they were new to recruiting here and they were having difficulties hiring even seniors. Right? So they had the vision that you get them early, you get the name in front of them early, such that then as they go through, they'll come visit your booth at the career fairs and will submit. So they've always been there.
Is that supposed to always crash?
Yeah, this was 13. Yeah, this was in 13. So yeah. But even during the crash, there were jobs for computer science. Not
No, I
everything.
was thinking about JP Morgan Chase for whatever.
Oh, well, yes, that is post that too. And the first semester, I just let the companies come free of charge. And I had a grant from NC-WIT, which is National Community Women in Technology. Actually, women in IT, so in technology. $5,000 grant, and it paid for all expenses of the showcase. So it bought all of the Arduinos and paid for the rooms and paid for the food and paid for the table company coverings and everything. Now it charges companies. Well, there's two levels. The companies that really want a lot of input and very select sheets on, these are the top teams, right? They get to pay. Those that just want to come and have their table and wander through and chat, they're free of charge. And we even give them a free lunch. So, yeah.
Try to sneak a quick question in here before the end. So I imagine you get projects that you see that this is going to be really ambitious. And if they're able to experience this, then they're really going to learn something. But then they don't make it to that end state, right? They don't achieve the objectives. But you have a sense that they did commit to it, and they did learn something. So how do you process that?
So they don't get all of the points. You know, these are graded, and these are graded by us. The companies do not grade the projects. They only give input to the students. We grade the projects, and we grade according to our published rubric, of which the students know the rubric. They're going to get points for it. They might not get 100% of the points, but they might get 80% of the points. Right? Rarely do we ever have teams fail totally. Rarely, rarely. All the years we've been doing this, I think there have been 2 teams that have accomplished next to nothing. And those teams self-destructed, of which we try not to do that. But only 2 of them. But it's more than just, there's this major project they have to do, right? Every one of them, they have to learn either a new language, a new package, or a new something. Only one of them is done in C++. The other ones are in Python or HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. Only one is in C++. And even that C++ one, they have to tie their project in to a graphics generator, such that Connect 4 is really graphically on the screen. It's just not text-based. So all of them need to go above and beyond what we taught them in class. Talk about scary. You want us to do what? Trust me, we're here to support you. We are all in here together. So I came up with the tagline of "We are EX183." And it's explained to them at the beginning of the course that it's not just you against us. It's you plus us. We're all in here, all of the TAs, all of the faculty, your fellow students are in this to get everybody here to succeed. Right? It's not like some courses that say, okay, look at the people on either side of you, one of you is going to be here at the end. Right? And it's obvious from day one, we expect every last one of them to be there at the end, and we are willing to give them as much support as they need to make that happen. But a lot of it's through eCoach. I cannot stress eCoach enough. If you have not used it, investigate it. He's not going to like me. I don't know if you can support this many, but look at eCoach.
If you come like Mary Lou, you get the support. Two-sided thing.
But there's the other side of Dan's question is that I do find, in not just in this class, but in general, student research projects, especially even with their honors theses, there's a sort of expectation management. And so we try to get to a point where they aren't at the end where like it doesn't come together. That's why there has to be a pitch, there has to be a plan, there has to be a proposal, and students tend to be pretty ambitious. On the one hand, you know, you can ask a lot of them and they'll feel freaked out at first, but they will learn it. And then the other is like, I want to do the entire world. I want to figure out whether democracy works. Like, you know, the last 80 years of political science has been working on that. So let's start with this literature and then find a So the sort of expectation management up front is also important, and then you feel comfortable at the end of the day to say, especially if you say that realization of the project is one of the rubric criteria, is that, look, you were too ambitious, we warned you, and it didn't come together, and that's too bad. Is this a cool project? You know, continue it if you want, but it didn't come together in this time, and you need to learn to manage those kinds of expectations.
The other thing I do is the number of students that take a pass-fail has been growing over the years, that if they have enough points after that second exam, of which it'll be on e-coach within 48 hours, right? So they know if they have enough points to pass the course, which is a C-, they can opt out of that final project if need be. The other thing we did was the last day they can withdraw from the course is that date. It's the LSA date to withdraw from the course, and we enforce it across every college. And their colleges, their college withdraw date is the last day of the semester. Right? Yes, they exist. We found out that the hard way. Right? So now, we don't care what college you're in, and they come from every college to take this course. The withdraw date is this date, period. You're not getting out after this day. It's helped a lot.
I kind of have two questions, one short though. How did you offer 1,000 office hours a week? You said each student could have an hour one-on-one office hours?
We only offer maybe 10 to 15 that is tutorial one-on-ones.
Okay. All
Right? And once those are gone, they're gone. We don't add more.
Okay.
But we might very well, we offer hundreds of office hours a week, but we're at this specific location from 3 in the afternoon to 8 o'clock at night, right? There's a sign-in sheet, paper pencil sign-in sheet. It works better than any computerized office hour sign-up we have ever come up with. Paper pencil, and we go through them. Remember, we have a staff of 32, right? 32, and they need, I don't know, 4 office hours a week or 5 office hours a week, so 32 times 5 is, plus the faculty, plus the people we hire just for office hours. So there's a lot of people to cover office hours, but it's still not enough.
Oh, yeah.
Office hours are still a major issue.
My question is, you've talked a lot about your rubrics and transparency, and so this is what I personally struggle with when trying to come up with this. How do you make everything transparent and on the rubric, but not at the same time just handing the students a checklist, a minimum checklist of check, 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 and they're more concerned with the checklist than the concepts or the content. I was just curious if you come across that. I mean, particularly with programming, it's very easy for everyone to have exactly the same answer on the simple problems, but anytime I want to introduce any type of, and now you've got to do this on their own, they then want a checklist for how you do it on their own.
So one possibility that I've done, there are a couple of different things that you can do with rubrics. One is that use a grading scale that first of all is non-standard. Try to get them thinking not in 100% terms. So I moved to, I think this semester it's 48,000 points, gets an A. And I learned that no assignment should be divisible by 100. And come up with a some number that starts with a 1. Otherwise, the GSIs and the students will think in terms of percentages. So first move away from that. And then think about which cell in your rubric is the meets expectations, and never have that be the last one. So there's always exceeds expectations. And then the exceeds expectations cell in the rubric, or however you want to create it, explicitly says, surprise us. So you can get a little more specific than that, but it is like going beyond. And so you get them to realize that the checkbox mentality, yes, can get you an A, but there is actually much more in this class that if you're interested in doing, you will actually do. And what Tim and I have found is that when you do that, some students, especially the overachieving types, will want to do everything. So then the flip side of that is like, you can try to do everything, don't try to do everything. And sometimes you have to explicitly ration it, sometimes you have to just explicitly discourage people from doing that. But so those are some of the ways in which you move away from, on the one hand, you're transparent, and on the other hand, you leave room for creativity.
On our final project, my rubric. one of the top things is the wow factor, right? 10 points. And the kids say, well, what's going to wow you? And I show them a couple of things. I said, okay, here's a clip. Right? Everyone in this room said, wow, why? What was it about this that you went, whoa? Right? And I show them another one. Okay, this is totally different than that clip. What made you go, wow? And every student just sits there, or they just, are in awe of it. What was it? That's what I expect from you. And they go, oh, thanks. But they come up with it.
They do.
Right?
Yeah, and innovation is one of my criteria. So after the first really awesome board game, not everybody, lots of people started doing board games, and many of them totally missed the point. So again, not everything is perfect. They did Trivial Pursuit games, which is like, this class is not about facts. Who cares? Right, I mean, facts matter, especially now, but that it's not about memorization. So sometimes, so when you say innovation, it's like something that we haven't seen before. And what's really interesting, and our colleague Andrew Sand, who is the Divisional Dean for Humanities, likes to point out that if your assignments are structured like this, you are going to be a lot less bored grading, because you will be surprised that it's something that you didn't think about, as opposed to this student regurgitating imperfectly, however well, something that I know much better, because that's my job.
Yeah.
And so it's not interesting, right?
I mean, one of the best things that I have had happen in this kind of teaching is to have students do things you want to brag about. I mean, how often does that happen in your introductory class? Students do work that you want to go tell everybody about.
Yeah, but my viewpoint.
But it happens, right?
Yeah, my viewpoint is I want the students to go brag about
It's
it.
both, right?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
really
So,
fun.
so this is a slightly vague answer, but partly because there has to be, in some ways, room for exploration and risk-taking.
So we made the point about remediation and have to really understand something very, very well in order to be able to successfully remediate it. I kind of thought of the grading of it might look like the reverse of that, that you really had to kind of really get the student's project and assignment and probably look at it in quite some depth to be able to understand, to reflect that thing that you do know already very well.
Right.
And I guess I just wondered how you think about doing that, because some of your things, are the low stakes things which you can just kind of eyeball them.
Right.
Is that reflected in the rubrics in some way? Is there a process that you go through for getting the essence of these assessments and how they are successful in their remediation or not?
We end up grading these collectively, so that's the first thing, and we do end up thinking about them quite a bit. But I guess this is in some ways following up on the previous question of discussion. It's more interesting, right? So it's actually when the students produce something where you really have to think about it, like, what's going on here? Do they really get it? I think that's part of the fun. It's interesting, but at the same time, the nice thing about this is that they are still pretty intro concepts, right? And the concepts and the theories are very difficult, so it's not hard really to tell, even if it's video that's Machiavelli's Guide to Dating, do they get Machiavelli right or not? Because there are some ways in which it's easy to see when people totally don't get it. And we're actually reasonably understanding even of that, if there's a genuine attempt at tackling with the text or the theories. So it's not like we hold them, one dimension is that do you interpret the material correctly, but it's not the only thing, and we're pretty flexible in the way that we would be on paper. So final examples, like you absolutely have to get it. Well, these are controversial theories, so who knows? So that's a long-winded way of answering, is that it's actually not all that hard, but it is also interesting, and then doing it collectively is a good way of doing it.
Can I ask one more? One thing that struck me was you said, you're committed to making these courses great, and so you expect the students to have the same type of commitment. How do students who aren't committed fare? Like, do they still make it through? Do they leave early? Some students won't be as committed depending on if it's a required course or not a required course. And that's what I was curious about. How do students who maybe aren't as committed, how do they fare in the course?
We have a very, very low withdrawal rate.
Okay.
A very low withdrawal rate, probably lower now than even 5 years ago. If they don't do everything, they normally get a C, maybe a B minus. There certainly are Fs, right? There are Fs, yes. There are some Ds, yes. But those go to, I think my grading scale goes down to about 50% before I start assigning Fs.
So it's a really good question, and one important thing in particular that I'm particularly concerned about is that the fact that there are few people who don't get into it or don't care. If that were the only fact, that'd be fine. Like people can vote with their feet, whatever. I also have a very low drop percentage, but the risk, what I'm really concerned about, is that to what extent am I advantaging prior skills, so sort of metacognitive skills or studenting skills, because we know that those actually correlate with some of the things we care about, low SES, first gen, and things like the resources that students bring. And it's tricky. What's interesting is that this semester I've done lots of analytics and I keep watching those things, and there is less of that. So when you give students lots of choices, you need to remind them that they have choices and take responsibility. I have lots of classes in Poli-Sci 101 who are student athletes. There are a couple of reasons they think that it's an easy A. It's not, because they actually have to work really hard for it. The other is that it's a flexible course, and student athletes are incredibly busy people. They're an example of people who are very busy. So they end up liking it in part because it works with their difficult schedule training and competition schedules. But I am mindful of the fact that there are sometimes the students who are massively under-resourced, who lack the sort of, I don't know, the metacognitive resources to do well, and I'm worried about them. And what we do is we troubleshoot with my GSI. So we do lots of progress reports. We have weekly meetings where we look at, we don't share a leaderboard with the class. My gameful pedagogy never includes competition, but we look at the leaderboard, and it's very easy to see, like, why are these people at the bottom of the scale? And then we do progress reports and things like that. So we are mindful of that. The anecdotal, more than anecdotal evidence, is that it's the middle of the pack, students who would have been B minus, B students, who get super excited, who come to tell me, like, I never would have been excited about this, but you made me excited about this really boring stuff. And I'm like, thank you.
So I have a question about resources, and this is maybe more for Mika, being that you teach in LSNA. So your GSI, your staff ratio, would be 13 GSIs in LSA, right? 75, that's our ratio anyway.
Yes.
So can you said you have GSIs, can you say something about quantity and students per GSI and how you manage the fraction calculation part of this?
So in this class, and this is a shift from 4 years ago, it's 4 credits. It's the contact hour ratio is 3 to 1, 3 faculty, 1 GSI. Each GSI has 60 students, 3 sections of 20.
Okay.
But I am very mindful, having been a graduate student here a long time ago myself, of exploitation. And so that's partly why I do these low stakes assignments, some of which I eyeball or are auto-graded. I grade some of the assignments that are very easy, so I try to minimize the GSI workload, because it's very tricky. In some ways the bigger issue is that with these sort of creative courses, the standard LSA model, which basically comes from labs, is that, or even humanities and social sciences, there's a lecture, which is unidirectional delivery of information historically, and then there's the discussion section where you do cool things. But now it's like, when the lecture is interactive, what happens in discussion section? So the bigger GSI challenge is, as I try to reduce the grading load, is to think about what is our relationship, what is our division of labor. And the simple theoretical way of thinking about it is that in the lecture it goes beyond information, but it gets to, in Bloomian taxonomy, it gets to understanding of the concepts. What is the collective action problem? And then in discussion, they'll talk about, next year you're going to have roommates. How do you solve the collective action problem with your roommates? Or things like that. So it's that's a bigger challenge to me than managing the students. basically it's like you can't assign as much work as ideally would be great. In my other course, which I teach for honors, which is a first year writing course, each GSI has 18 students. I can assign all kinds of writing because they can grade them.
Right, so I think Jimmy and I can say, you've got 15 fewer students per GSI, right, than we do.
Right.
So what do you teach?
Communication studies, same division of LSA as Mika's in. Yeah.
I have
So-
one comment. We used to have discussion sections, and at that point, it was between 40 and 50 students per staff member because of discussion section. We changed to labs, and the monies get assigned differently for labs, and more monies come back to the specific department, but it is labeled a lab, of which there are different criteria for labs than discussion sections. So we changed to labs such that we could reduce that ratio. And that was a very specific, logical choice, was to pull more monies to the department to do it.
I mean, that ratio changes if it's upper level writing and various
Correct.
other things, but the standard, I mean, I'm trying to think of how we would do this, and so auto grading sounds very interesting.
Right, so there are lots of things
yeah.
that nobody can really defend multiple choice exams as pedagogically awesome, but they are sometimes a perfectly legitimate trade-off when you think about lots of things, and when they're part of a large menu of things, I have no apologies for my using multiple choice, grading quizzes, because I think that's an interesting way of doing it. So, but I am mindful of that. I think the broader conversation in LSA should exactly be, how do we think about the relationship between the lecture and the discussion?
And I think it's also, I'm hopeful that, this kind of process, talking about a lot of these classes, making comparisons among them, will change the conversation from there's some kind of bureaucratic formula to what are you actually doing in this class? And is that something that justifies the use of more GSI time? And, if you're just trying to make your life easier, or, it's a different argument. But if you're doing something great, there should be a way to make that argument and say, look, a fixed fraction calculation by student number, it's not the 1920s.
But even the fraction calculation form, having done it creatively lately for lots of things, it's totally legitimate, but thinking seriously about it, because it used to be, at least in my department, like we submitted the fraction calculations to the GSIs, they are the same we used in 2002. I'm like, wait a minute, let me look at it. Like exam grading. I'm like, there's no exam grading, because that's auto-graded, whatever. So there are ways in which you can even use the affordances of the bureaucratic tools to think about, like, what is it that my GSIs are doing, and if we connect this to space use, and if it ends up actually reducing our space use, there are lots of people in the LSA building and Fleming who are going to be like, thank you, that's really great, because that's going to be, continuing problem in LSA particularly.
Well, thank you very much, both Mika and Mika.